June 30, 1944. 200 miles west of Saipan, the Pacific night stretches black and infinite. Lieutenant Dale Haberman throttles forward his Northrop P-61, call sign Moon Happy, as his radar operator Lieutenant Ray Mooney watches a single blip materialize on the SER-720 screen. Below them, nothing but ocean. Above, a canopy of stars. Between those two absolutes, somewhere in 3 dimensions of darkness, flies a Japanese Mitsubishi G4M bomber whose crew believes the night belongs to them. For years, that belief has been unshakable. Japanese aviators have owned these dark hours, arriving over American positions to drop bombs, disrupt sleep and vanish before dawn. They've operated with near impunity, their twin engines desynchronized to create a distinctive rattling sound that keeps entire Marine battalions awake on islands from Guadalcanal to Bougainville. The Americans call them Washing Machine Charlie. Tonight that changes. Haberman closes to 700 feet, opens fire with 4 20mm cannons and 4.50 caliber machine guns, and the Betty explodes so violently that Moon Happy flies straight through the debris field. Metal fragments pepper the left cowling. The burning wreckage spirals down toward the water. It's the first confirmed kill for the P-61 Black Widow in the Pacific War. The Japanese never see what hits them. The conquest of night had become warfare's most elusive prize. During World War I, aerial combat occurred almost exclusively in daylight. Bombers attempting nocturnal raids navigated by moonlight and guesswork, their crews groping through darkness with little hope of finding specific targets. By 1940, that calculation had shifted. The Luftwaffe discovered that British defenses could shred daylight bomber formations, so they pivoted to night operations during the Blitz. Cities burned. Civilians died. And the Royal Air Force scrambled to develop countermeasures that didn't yet exist. They needed aircraft that could see in absolute darkness, intercept bombers flying at varying altitudes and speeds, and engage targets their pilots couldn't visually acquire. Britain's answer came in modified Bristol Beaufighters equipped with primitive airborne radar, but these were stopgap solutions, aircraft never designed for the mission they now flew. America watched Britain struggle and began planning something different. Something purpose-built. In December 1940, as London endured nightly bombardment, the United States Army Air Corps issued a requirement for a dedicated night fighter. Jack Northrop submitted a radical design. A twin-engine, twin-boom aircraft large enough to carry a 3-man crew, advanced radar equipment, and enough firepower to destroy any bomber it encountered. The proposal defeated Douglas Aircraft Company's competing design, and on January 30, 1941, the Army awarded Northrop a contract for 2 prototypes. The aircraft would be called the P-61. Its unofficial name would come later, painted on the nose of one of the first production models, Black Widow. The choice was deliberate. Northrop's engineers had discovered through testing that high-gloss jet black paint rendered the aircraft nearly invisible in night skies, more effective than flat black or conventional camouflage. The P-61 would hunt in darkness, strike without warning and leave only wreckage behind. Like its arachnid namesake, it was designed to be lethal. The technical challenges were immense. The aircraft needed to carry the SER-720 airborne intercept radar, a device weighing over 400 pounds and requiring its own dedicated operator. It needed enough fuel capacity to patrol for hours. It needed to be fast enough to catch enemy bombers, maneuverable enough to engage in combat, and stable enough for the radar operator to work effectively during long missions. Northrop's solution was a monster by fighter standards. The P-61 stretched 49 feet long with a 66-foot wingspan and weighed over 22,000 pounds empty. It mounted 2 Pratt & Whitney R2800 engines producing 2,000 horsepower each. Its main armament sat in the lower fuselage, 4 20mm Hispano M2 autocannons capable of shredding bombers. A dorsal turret added 4.50 caliber machine guns, remotely controlled and capable of engaging targets in any direction. The radar operator could aim this turret from his position, or the pilot could lock it forward for additional firepower during frontal attacks. The first XP-61 flew on May 26, 1942. By October 1943, production models were rolling off the assembly line. But combat deployment would take months more. The aircraft was complex, demanding specialized training for 3-man crews who needed to function as a cohesive unit in the chaos of night combat. Pilots had to master instrument flying in absolute darkness. Radar operators needed to interpret the phosphorescent blips on their screens and guide pilots toward targets they couldn't see. Gunners had to maintain and operate temperamental remote-controlled turrets while traveling at 300 miles per hour through turbulent air. Training bases in Florida and California worked frantically to prepare crews, but by early 1944, commanders in both Europe and the Pacific were growing impatient. They needed these aircraft immediately. In February 1944, the 422nd Night Fighter Squadron deployed to England without their P-61s, which were delayed by production issues and concerns about the aircraft's performance. Some USAF generals questioned whether the Black Widow was fast enough to engage German fighters and bombers. The Royal Air Force suggested using de Havilland Mosquito night fighters instead. To settle the debate, the Americans arranged a competition at Herne, England in late May 1944. Ground crews prepared their P-61 meticulously, and when the fly-off commenced, the Black Widow outperformed the Mosquito in climb rate, maneuverability, and radar effectiveness. The American crews considered it a decisive victory, though the British maintained diplomatic ambiguity. Both aircraft would see extensive service, but the P-61 had proven its worth. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, American forces faced a different nocturnal threat. Japanese bombers conducted harassment raids against Allied positions across the Solomon Islands, New Guinea, and eventually the Marianas. These raids rarely caused significant damage, but their psychological impact was profound. Night after night, lone Japanese aircraft would arrive over American positions, their unsynchronized engines creating a distinctive rattling sound that Marines likened to old Maytag washing machines. They dropped bombs, fired at parked aircraft, and generally ensured that nobody got any sleep. The Americans called them Washing Machine Charlie, Louis the Louse, or Bedcheck Charlie depending on the island and the mood. Fighter pilots like Major Greg Pappy Boyington and Medal of Honor recipient Joe Foss attempted to intercept these raiders using daylight fighters, but locating a single aircraft in the vast darkness of the Pacific proved nearly impossible. The raids continued with frustrating regularity. What American forces needed was an aircraft that could find these nocturnal raiders and destroy them. What they needed was the Black Widow. The 6th Night Fighter Squadron was one of the oldest air combat units in the Pacific, with origins dating to 1913 when Lieutenant Harold Geiger established an air school in Hawaii. By 1943, the squadron was flying Douglas P-70 night fighters, converted A-20 Havocs equipped with primitive radar, over Guadalcanal with limited success. The P-70s lacked the speed to intercept Japanese fighters and the endurance to patrol effectively. On March 20 to 21, 1943, Japanese night bombers damaged 15 B-24 Liberators and 5 B-17 Flying Fortresses on the ground at Henderson Field while the 6th Squadron's P-70s circled uselessly overhead. 8 months later, similar raids sank one ship and damaged 3 others at Bougainville. The Army Air Forces conducted an assessment and reached a blunt conclusion. Preventing Japanese night raids with existing aircraft was essentially impossible. In early March 1944, the 6th Squadron was pulled back to Hawaii and told to prepare for something new. The first P-61 Black Widows began arriving at John Rogers Field in early May. Crews who had spent months fighting with inadequate equipment now faced a different challenge: learning to operate the most sophisticated fighter aircraft in the American arsenal. The Black Widow arrived partially disassembled, shipped in crates with minimal documentation. Some units received no instruction manuals. Pilots accustomed to single-engine fighters now had to master a twin-engine aircraft weighing as much as a medium bomber. Radar operators stared at equipment they'd never seen before, trying to interpret signals bouncing back from distant targets. The learning curve was steep, but time was short. Northrop dispatched Chief Engineering Test Pilot John Myers to Hawaii to help train crews and troubleshoot problems. By early June, the squadron was declared operational. On June 15, 1944, United States Marines stormed ashore on Saipan in the Mariana Islands. The battle would rage for nearly a month, costing over 3,000 American lives. But the strategic implications were enormous. Saipan sat 1,500 miles from Tokyo, well within the range of the new B-29 Superfortress bombers. Control of Saipan would allow the United States to conduct sustained strategic bombing of Japan's industrial heartland. Construction of Isley Field began on June 24, before the island was even declared secure. Naval construction battalions cleared jungle, poured concrete, and erected facilities to support hundreds of B-29s. The first superfortress, Jolton Josie, would land on October 12. By November, over 100 B-29s would be stationed there, poised to strike Japan itself. The Japanese understood the implications. Saipan's fall triggered the resignation of Prime Minister Hideki Tojo. Emperor Hirohito recognized that American control meant Tokyo would be bombed. The Imperial Japanese Navy and Army began planning counterstrikes. The 6th Night Fighter Squadron deployed to Saipan in mid-June 1944, flying their P-61s directly from Hawaii. They landed on rough airfields where snipers still operated in the surrounding jungle and construction crews worked around the clock to prepare for the B-29s. 9 days after the Marines' landing on June 24, the Black Widows began defensive operations. The first operational P-61 mission launched on June 25. Crews flew into darkness over the Pacific, their radar operators scanning for contacts while anti-aircraft batteries on Saipan maintained nervous trigger discipline. The Japanese weren't waiting. Between June 24 and July 21, the squadron attempted 37 interceptions of incoming raids. Radar operators picked up 27 contacts. Many were false alarms or lone reconnaissance aircraft. Some were Japanese bombers staging through Iwo Jima, 600 miles to the north, to strike the American positions under construction. On June 30, Lieutenant Dale Haberman and radar operator Lieutenant Ray Mooney were on patrol when their radar picked up a contact. A single blip heading toward Saipan. Mooney guided Haberman toward the target while the pilot maintained maximum airspeed, diving from 10,000 feet to 1,200 feet above the water. The moon was well positioned, and at 2,500 feet they achieved visual identification. A Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber, its twin engines unsynchronized, creating that distinctive rattling sound American troops had learned to hate. At 700 feet, Haberman opened fire. All 8 guns converged on the bomber. The Betty exploded violently, and before Haberman could react, Moon Happy plowed through the debris field. Metal fragments hammered the left cowling. For a moment the crew thought they might be going down. But the P-61 held together. They tracked the flaming wreckage all the way to the water, 160 miles from Saipan, then turned for home. They'd burned 550 gallons of fuel and fired 327 20mm rounds and 5 25.50 caliber rounds. It was the first confirmed kill for the P-61 in the Pacific War. The Black Widows continued flying defensive patrols as Isley Field took shape beneath them. Japanese raids intensified through the summer. A typical assault force consisted of a dozen Betty bombers flying 20 miles apart to complicate interception. The P-61 crews discovered a vulnerability. If they could shoot down the lead bomber, the others would jettison their bombs and flee. It became standard doctrine. Find the leader, destroy it, watch the formation scatter. Between June and January 1945, the 6th and 548th Night Fighter Squadrons claimed 5 additional kills before the raids finally stopped. The Japanese had learned a harsh lesson. American fighters now owned the night. The Black Widow's effectiveness stemmed from its radar. The SCR-720 system could detect aircraft from 5 to 20 miles away depending on conditions, giving crews enough time to position for an attack. The radar operator sat behind and below the pilot, surrounded by instruments and displays, calling out bearings and ranges while the pilot maneuvered based on that information alone. Visual identification came only in the final moments before engagement, sometimes aided by moonlight, sometimes by the faint glow of exhaust stacks. Some crews never saw their targets before opening fire, trusting the radar entirely. The system was temperamental, prone to breakdowns, and sometimes impossible to repair due to parts shortages. But when it worked, it was devastating. On November 2, 1944, Japanese forces launched the first coordinated strike against the American B-29 bases in the Marianas. The Imperial Army had organized a special duty attack unit consisting of 9 Mitsubishi Ki-67 Hiryu heavy bombers staging through Iwo Jima. Bad weather complicated the mission from the start, but shortly after 1:30 a.m., the bombers descended to wavetop level to evade American radar and struck Isley Field. They dropped fragmentation bombs on the runway, causing minimal damage but demonstrating that Japanese forces could still reach the island. Anti-aircraft guns shot down one bomber over Tinian. EP-61 from the 6th Squadron intercepted and destroyed a Betty that crashed into an engineer's bivouac area, killing 4 Americans and seriously wounding 6 more. Of the 9 Hiryu bombers dispatched, 5 were lost to enemy action or operational causes. The raid achieved little beyond proving the Japanese could still strike back. But it changed American calculations. General Curtis LeMay, commanding the B-29 operations, demanded better protection for his bases. Admiral Chester Nimitz and General Douglas MacArthur concurred. The P-61 squadrons received priority for replacement aircraft, parts and personnel. Additional night fighter units deployed to the Marianas. The 548th Night Fighter Squadron arrived in September 1944, the 549th followed shortly after. New microwave early warning radars were installed, linked to SER-615 and in/TPS-10 height finder radars that gave controllers precise information about incoming raids. The integrated system meant P-61 crews could be vectored directly toward threats, reducing the time spent searching empty sky. 3 Japanese sorties in quick succession became one-way trips, their crews never making it back to Iwo Jima. The raids continued through late 1944 and early 1945, growing more desperate as Japanese air strength dwindled. On December 6, 10 Hiryu bombers staged through Iwo Jima for what would be one of the war's largest night attacks against Saipan. 2 aircraft turned back with mechanical issues. The remaining 8 split into 2 4-ship elements, dropping to wave-top level to evade radar. They struck at multiple points, attempting to overwhelm the defenses. Anti-aircraft fire filled the sky. P-61 scrambled from alert positions, their crews racing to intercept raiders that appeared and disappeared in the darkness. The battles were chaotic, fought in 3 dimensions with minimal visual references, pilots trusting their instruments and radar operators' guidance while trying to avoid both enemy aircraft and friendly fire from ground batteries. One P-61 crew nearly collided with a Betty while pursuing it through searchlight beams. Another engaged a Hiryu at such close range that the bomber's defensive gunners put holes in the Black Widow's vertical stabilizers before the P-61's cannons tore the bomber apart. On Christmas night 1944, the Japanese intensified their attacks again. The squadron intercepted many raiders and shot down several. Lieutenant Robert Ferguson, flying AP-61A-5 named the Virgin Widow, engaged a formation of bombers that had penetrated close to Isley Field. His radar operator guided him through the darkness while searchlights swept the sky and anti-aircraft shells burst at various altitudes, creating a deadly constellation of explosions. Ferguson closed on a Betty, confirmed visual identification, and opened fire from 600 feet. The bomber disintegrated. Another P-61 Midnight Mickey engaged 2 more Bettys during the same night, destroying both. By dawn, the squadron had achieved multiple kills, but the psychological toll was severe. Crews flew mission after mission, night after night, knowing that a single navigation error or equipment failure could send them into the ocean with no hope of rescue. The Black Widow's reputation grew. Japanese bomber crews began reporting encounters with unknown American aircraft that appeared without warning in the darkness. Some described black shapes materializing out of the night, others mentioned only the sudden appearance of tracer fire before their aircraft exploded. Interrogations of captured Japanese aircrews conducted as part of the United States Strategic Bombing Survey revealed a stark shift in tactics. By late 1944, Japanese forces were avoiding night operations over areas where American night fighters operated. The raids didn't stop entirely, but their intensity and effectiveness declined sharply. The night, which had belonged to Japan for the first 3 years of the Pacific War, now belonged to America. By early 1945, the strategic situation had shifted dramatically. The XXI Bomber Command operated 5 wings totaling nearly 1,000 B-29 superfortresses from bases on Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. These aircraft conducted increasingly devastating raids against Japanese industrial centers and civilian populations. General Curtis LeMay had switched from high-altitude precision bombing to low-altitude incendiary attacks, which proved catastrophically effective. On the night of March 9 to 10, 1945, 279 B-29s dropped over 1,650 tons of incendiaries on Tokyo, creating a firestorm that killed more than 80,000 people and destroyed a quarter of the city. Subsequent raids targeted Kobe, Nagoya, Osaka, Yokohama, and dozens of smaller cities. Japan's industrial capacity was being systematically destroyed, and the bombing campaign required protection. P-61 squadrons expanded their mission profiles. Defensive patrols continued, but crews also began flying night intruder missions over Japanese-held islands, seeking out enemy aircraft on the ground or in transit. They escorted damaged B-29s limping back from raids, providing protection against Japanese fighters attempting to finish off crippled bombers. They conducted reconnaissance, using their radar to map enemy positions and shipping movements. The 548th Night Fighter Squadron deployed to Iwo Jima on March 7, 1945, joining the 47th Fighter Squadron. From there they could patrol closer to Japan itself, interdicting any Japanese aircraft attempting to reach the Marianas. The operational tempo was relentless. Maintenance crews worked through daylight hours to repair battle damage and conduct routine maintenance, knowing their aircraft had to be ready by sunset. Pilots and radar operators grabbed sleep when they could, ate meals that were often interrupted by alert sirens, and flew missions measured in hours rather than minutes. The night of August 14 to 15, 1945, marked both an ending and a beginning. Japan had agreed to surrender following the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but not all Japanese forces had received or accepted the message. The 548th Night Fighter Squadron launched defensive patrols as usual. Lieutenant Lee Kendall, flying AP-61B named Lady in the Dark, was vectored toward a contact southeast of Aishima. His radar operator acquired the target, and Kendall closed for visual identification. It was a Nakajima Ki-43 Hayabusa fighter, codenamed Oscar by the Americans. Rather than immediately engaging, Kendall maneuvered to force the Oscar down, attempting to avoid killing a pilot who might not know the war was over. The Japanese pilot maneuvered aggressively, possibly believing he was under attack. The two aircraft danced through the darkness, each trying to gain advantage. Finally, the Oscar dove toward the water and crashed into the sea without Kendall firing a shot. The following night, August 15th, Lady in the Dark flew again. No official orders to cease combat operations had been issued to the Night Fighter Squadrons. The radar operator detected another contact. This time, Kendall identified a Nakajima Ki-44 Shoki, codenamed Tojo. The Japanese pilot saw the Black Widow and attempted to escape, diving and turning aggressively. Kendall pursued, matching every maneuver. Finally, he achieved firing position and opened up with his 20mm cannons. The Tojo exploded. It was one of the last aerial kills of World War II, coming hours after Japan's official surrender announcement but before all forces had stood down. 2 days later, a B-32 Dominator bomber would claim the final kills of the war when its crew shot down two A-6M0 fighters that attacked their aircraft over Tokyo. The P-61 Black Widow flew combat for just over 1 year in the Pacific Theater, arriving in June 1944 and operating until the war's end in August 1945. In that brief period, Black Widow crews destroyed 127 enemy aircraft and 18 V-1 buzz bombs in all theaters of operation. Several P-61 squadrons completed the war with no confirmed kills despite flying hundreds of missions, a testament to how thoroughly American forces had achieved air superiority by 1945. The 6th Night Fighter Squadron, which flew some of the most intense missions of the campaign, downed multiple Japanese aircraft and provided critical protection for the B-29 bases that ultimately forced Japan's surrender without requiring a ground invasion of the home islands. The strategic impact exceeded the modest kill totals. Japanese forces that had operated with near impunity during the early war years found themselves hunted in the darkness. Night raids against American positions decreased sharply once P-61s arrived in theater. Japanese bomber formations scattered when engaged by Black Widows, jettisoning their bombs to escape. The psychological effect on Japanese aircrews was significant. Captured pilots reported fear of encountering the black aircraft that appeared without warning and disappeared just as quickly. American forces, meanwhile, gained the ability to operate at night with reasonable security. B-29 crews could focus on their missions rather than worrying about night fighters attacking their bases. Ground forces on newly captured islands could sleep without expecting Washing Machine Charlie to arrive every evening. The Black Widow's technological legacy proved more important than its combat record. It was the first American aircraft designed from inception as a night fighter, integrating radar, heavy armament, and long endurance into a single platform. The lessons learned from operating the P-61 informed the development of all-weather fighters in the post-war era, including the F-82 Twin Mustang, which saw combat during the Korean War, and eventually the F-4 Phantom II, which incorporated radar-guided combat tactics as standard doctrine. The concept of a multi-crew fighter with dedicated radar operators influenced interceptor design through the Cold War and beyond. Even modern strike fighters with sophisticated sensors owe something to the Black Widow's pioneering integration of radar and weapon systems. After the war ended, P-61 squadrons served in occupied Japan and Korea. The 6th Night Fighter Squadron transferred to Atsugi Airfield, Japan in June 1946, providing air defense during the occupation. It was inactivated in February 1947, its personnel and aircraft transferred to the 339th Fighter Squadron. Other Black Widow units followed similar paths, gradually being absorbed into the newly formed United States Air Force. The last operational P-61s flew until 1954, a remarkable service life for an aircraft that arrived late to World War II. Some served in specialized roles, including the RF-61C reconnaissance variant, which conducted the first comprehensive aerial photographic survey of Pacific Islands. One P-61C participated in the National Thunderstorm Project, using its radar to penetrate severe weather and gather data that improved aviation safety. The Black Widow proved adaptable beyond its original combat role. Only 706 P-61s were built, including all variants, a tiny fraction of the over 100,000 American fighter aircraft produced during World War II. Yet the aircraft achieved a mythic reputation that belied its small production run. Pilots who flew the Black Widow praised its handling characteristics, power, and lethality. Radar operators appreciated the effectiveness of the SCR-720 system despite its temperamental nature. Ground crews developed deep affection for the aircraft, giving individual Black Widows colorful names. Moon Happy, Midnight Mickey, Sleepy Time Gal, the Virgin Widow, Lady in the Dark, Nocturnal Nuisance, Time's a Wastin'. These weren't just aircraft. They were trusted machines that brought their crews home from the most dangerous flying imaginable. The conquest of night changed warfare fundamentally. For millennia, darkness had been a refuge, a time when armies ceased fighting and took shelter. Aviation extended combat into daylight hours but initially stopped at sunset. The development of effective night fighters broke that final barrier. The Black Widow represented the culmination of years of research, engineering, and combat experience distilled into a single purpose-built machine. It wasn't the fastest fighter. It wasn't the most maneuverable. It wasn't produced in overwhelming numbers. But when night fell over the Pacific and Japanese bombers believed themselves safe in the darkness, the Black Widow was waiting. Lieutenant Dale Haberman's first kill on June 30, 1944, was more than just one bomber destroyed. It announced that American technology had achieved parity in the night sky, that Japanese forces could no longer operate freely after sunset, that the tactical calculus had shifted permanently. Every subsequent Black Widow mission reinforced that message. Every Japanese bomber that failed to return from a night raid carried the same lesson back to Imperial headquarters. The Americans could see in the dark. They could fight in the dark. They owned the dark. The crew of Lady in the Dark, downing a Japanese fighter on the night of August 15, 1945, closed a chapter in aviation history that had opened with crude experiments during World War I. In just over 30 years, night fighting had evolved from pilots groping blindly through darkness to radar-guided interceptions conducted with lethal precision. The Black Widow stood at the apex of that evolution, a deadly synthesis of technology, training, and doctrine. When the war ended and the P-61 squadron stood down, they left behind a transformed battlefield where night no longer offered protection, where darkness no longer guaranteed safety, where three-man crews and black aircraft had hunted their enemies across empty skies and won. The spider's web had been cast across the Pacific night, and Japanese bombers had flown straight into it.